Born richer than queens and closer to the French throne than almost anyone alive, Anne Marie Louise d'Orléans should have lived a life of limitless freedom. Instead, her immense fortune made her a political prize, a royal threat, and ultimately, a woman trapped by power, scandal, and loneliness. This is the tragic story of Europe's richest heiress, and how she ended up isolated, exiled, and alone. Anne Marie Louise d'Orléans, the future Duchess of Montpensier, was born in the Louvre Palace in central Paris on the 29th of May 1627. Back then, the Louvre was not a museum or art gallery, but one of the main residences of the French royal family in central Paris. And the reason why Anne Marie was born here was because she was of course royalty as well. Her father was Gaston, Duke of Orléans. He was a younger son of King Henri IV of France, who had founded the Royal House of Bourbon back in 1589 and ruled France until his assassination in 1610. Thus, Anne Marie was the king's granddaughter, and her uncle was Henri IV's eldest son and heir, King Louis XIII. Anne Marie's mother was Marie de Bourbon, Duchess of Montpensier. She hailed from another branch of the House of Bourbon and had become a duchess when she was only an infant, after the death of her father. Marie and Gaston had married in August 1626, and she fell pregnant for the first time within weeks. Sadly, Anne Marie would never know her mother. She became ill after giving birth, and died on the 4th of June 1627, aged just 21, less than a week after Anne Marie was born. With her mother dead, the newborn Anne Marie inherited the title Duchess of Montpensier, and a fortune so vast that, at just 6 days old, she became one of the wealthiest heiresses in France. Anne Marie's early life was complicated. She grew up in and around the royal court, though her father's base was in the city of Orléans to the south of Paris. After the death of his first wife, it was expected that Gaston would remarry and produce a male heir to inherit one of the largest fortunes in the kingdom. Instead, in the years that followed, he began a relationship with Marguerite of Lorraine, and secretly married her in 1632 after his brother Louis XIII refused to grant permission for the match. The king opposed the marriage for political reasons, as France was in conflict with Lorraine at the time. When news of the union reached the royal court, Gaston was pressured into having the marriage annulled. As a child, Anne Marie lived at the Palais de Tuileries under the care of her governess, who oversaw her education and taught her to read and write. When the future Louis XIV was born in September 1638, Anne Marie, who was 11, declared that she would one day marry him, affectionately calling the infant her little husband, to the amusement of the royal court. Her remarks, however, earned her reprimand from both Louis XIII and Cardinal Richelieu. Meanwhile, her father had other ambitions and hoped to marry her to another royal cousin, though nothing came of this. In the early summer of 1643, Gaston would finally remarry his love Marguerite. As Louis XIII lay dying, he at last granted his brother permission to legitimize a union he had long opposed. This mattered enormously for Anne Marie because throughout those years, Gaston had failed to produce a surviving male heir. Gaston and Marguerite would have several children together, but all of their offsprings were daughters, except for one boy. This was Jean-Gaston, the Duke of Valois. Sadly, he would die from dehydration and other complications caused by a bout of severe diarrhea in August 1652, when he was 2 years old. This meant that Anne Marie, as her father's eldest daughter, would one day inherit his vast estates and titles, making her one of the most desirable princesses in Europe. But her actions would soon lead to a far darker path. By the time her little brother died in August 1652, Anne Marie had carved out quite a name for herself in France's politics. This was connected to a civil war which was underway in the country. Back in May 1643, Anne Marie's 4.5-year-old first cousin had succeeded his father as King Louis XIV of France. He was too young to rule for many years, and France was bogged down in a 30 Years' War at the time against the Austrian and Spanish Habsburgs. The raising of heavy taxes to fund the war, and the lack of an effective king, reached a climax in 1648 when revolts broke out in Paris and then spread to other major cities. The Fronde, as the Civil War became known, continued in stages for 5 years. During the Fronde, Anne Marie became notorious for her suspected sympathies toward the rebels, yet her loyalties were far more complicated than many realized. In the early years of the revolt, she openly supported rebel leaders in Bordeaux and even traveled there herself. But later, she dramatically helped negotiate a peace between the rebellious city and the royal government. Then, when fresh unrest erupted in 1652, Anne Marie travelled to Orléans and attempted to negotiate with the rebels there. But when she arrived, the city gates were locked and authorities denied her entry. Refusing to turn back, she crossed the river by boat, scrambling over the defences like a cat, and slipped through a gap in the gate. Soon afterwards, she was triumphantly paraded through the streets and emerged as the unofficial figurehead of the rebellion. Later, Anne Marie returned to Paris, where she would permanently tie her fate to the rebellion and forge her reputation as an ally of the rebels. During the Battle of Faubourg Saint-Antoine on the 2nd of July 1652, beneath the looming walls of the infamous Bastille in the city, she took the shocking step of ordering the fortress cannons to fire on royal forces in support of Louis, the Prince of Condé, the government's most dangerous enemy and her own royal cousin. Despite her intervention, the rebellion was crushed. With the royalists victorious and her reputation in ruins, Anne Marie was forced to flee Paris. The Fronde finally collapsed the following year, and the young Louis XIV emerged determined that no challenge to royal authority would ever threaten him again. Although Anne Marie had sided with rebellious nobles like the Prince of Condé rather than the common people, her actions would not be forgotten, and soon the richest heiress in France would find herself living in exile, isolated from the glittering court she had once loved. Anne Marie's actions during the Fronde made any return to court impossible. Branded a dangerous rebel by the victorious royalists, she fled into exile at the remote chateau of Saint-Fargeau in Burgundy. The vast old manor was neglected and in poor condition, forcing the fallen princess to rebuild much of it while she spent the next 5 years laying low, afraid of being imprisoned at any time, while her first cousin imposed his rule over France. Though she escaped direct punishment, her father was stripped of his many lands and titles for his role in the revolt. During her years in exile, Anne Marie transformed Saint-Fargeau into a grand Baroque residence, employing the architect Louis Levaux, who would later become famous for his work at the Palace of Versailles. Much of his work at Saint-Fargeau, however, was destroyed by a fire in the 18th century. By 1657, the chaos of the Civil War had begun to fade from memory, and the 30-year-old Anne Marie finally decided to emerge from exile. Her father, who had also fallen from favour during the Fronde, had recently been permitted to return to the royal court by the young king, and Anne Marie soon joined him. At court, Anne Marie was regarded by nobles and even family members who had not seen her in many years as a reasonably pretty woman, but hardly a beauty of the French court. Yet what she lacked in glamour, she more than compensated for in wealth. She was already one of the richest women in France, but her immense fortune grew even larger after the death of her father. He died on the 2nd of February 1660 at 51 years of age. Although many of his estates had been confiscated in 1652 owing to his involvement in the Civil War, and when he died, Anne Marie succeeded to a vast array of lands, farms, castles and manors. Overnight, the once exiled rebel princess became one of the most desirable unmarried women in all of Europe, and every royal court now watched closely to see who might marry the richest heiress in Europe, and possibly the world. By the time her father died in 1660, Anne Marie, now widely known as La Grande Mademoiselle, the Great Lady, was 32 years old and still unmarried, something almost scandalous for a princess of her rank. In an age when noble women were often married off at 15 or 16, Europe's richest heiress had somehow remained single for decades. The chaos of the Fronde and Anne Marie's years in exile partly explain why she remained unmarried by 1660. Yet the real story was even more extraordinary. Over the years, princes and royal suitors had pursued her immense fortune, But again and again the negotiations collapsed, or Anne Marie herself refused the match. For instance, in 1646, one proposal suggested that Anne Marie would marry Ferdinand III, Holy Roman Emperor, after the death of his wife, Maria Anna of Spain. Such a marriage between the first cousin of Louis XIV and the ruler of the Habsburg Empire might have helped strengthen peace negotiations during the final years of the 30 Years' War. In the end, however, the talks collapsed. Ferdinand instead married Maria Leopoldine of Austria in 1648, and later Eleonora Gonzaga. Then, the Fronde and Anne Marie's years in exile had all but destroyed her marriage prospects, but after her return to court in 1657, Europe's richest heiress suddenly became desirable once again. One proposal even suggested she marry Philip I, Duke of Orleans, her first cousin and the younger brother of Louis XIV. But Philippe was 13 years younger than Anne Marie, notoriously immature, and still deeply attached to his mother, so Anne Marie rejected the match. In the end, Philippe would marry Henrietta Anne Stuart, a sister of King Charles II of England. There had also been discussions over the years about marrying Anne Marie to Charles during his years of exile on the continent. But after the restoration of the English monarchy in 1660 allowed Charles to return to England and reclaim his throne, he instead married Catherine of Braganza, a Portuguese princess whose dowry brought England both money and valuable overseas possessions. It was also a Portuguese royal that was Anne Marie's last major suitor. In 1663, Louis XIV suggested that she marry Afonso VI of Portugal. The proposal horrified her though. Afonso was 16 years younger than Anne Marie, physically disabled, and widely regarded as unstable and immature. Anne Marie had no desire to leave France to marry a young foreign king in distant Lisbon. Although she rejected every single one of her marriage prospects or they collapsed, Anne Marie soon embarked on a romance that would erupt into one of the greatest scandals of her life. In the late 1660s, Anne Marie fell in love with Antoine Nompart de Caumont, the first Duke of Lausanne. He came from an impoverished minor French noble family and had risen to fame and power at court via his role as a diplomat to Spain. After a courtship of several months, Anne Marie asked her cousin the king for permission to marry Lausanne. To the astonishment of the royal court, Louis initially agreed, and they were set to marry each other in Paris in December 1670. But just days before the ceremony was set to take place, the king suddenly reversed his decision. The match had provoked outrage among the French royal family, especially because Europe's richest heiress was attempting to marry a man they considered far beneath her rank. On top of this, Louis's wife, Anne the Duke of Orleans, stood to inherit much of her estates one day if she never married. Anne Marie was furious when the wedding was suddenly cancelled and withdrew from public life for weeks. But worse was still to come. Lausanne was arrested and imprisoned for daring to marry so far above his station. Held under heavy guard, he repeatedly attempted to escape, but failed each time. As the years dragged on, reports emerged of his increasingly erratic behaviour. His prison cell fell into chaos, while his beard and appearance became so wild that some believed he was losing his mind. Lausanne remained in prison for over 10 years, as Anne Marie desperately petitioned for his release. In the end, she was pressured into surrendering vast estates and enormous wealth to secure his freedom. Finally, in 1681, Lausanne was released from prison. Rumours soon spread that the pair had secretly married, but the years of imprisonment had transformed him. The fiery romance that had once scandalised the French court was now little more than ashes. After more than a decade of separation, bitterness and humiliation, their love affair was effectively over. Anne Marie was left disillusioned by the events of the 1670s, and she increasingly spent time away from the court at the Palais du Luxembourg, another great royal residence on the outskirts of Paris which she had inherited when her stepmother, Marguerite of Lorraine, died in 1672. By the 1680s, the French court had left Paris too, moving to Versailles at the direction of Louis XIV. The Grande Mademoiselle was rarely seen there. Instead, she lived a quiet, somewhat reclusive later life, dying at the Palais du Luxembourg on the 5th of April 1693 at 65 years of age. Shortly before her death, Lausanne had requested to see her, but the prideful Grand Mademoiselle refused him. Her great estate and lands, which had been reduced in order to pay for the Duke's release 12 years earlier, largely passed to her cousin, the Duke of Orleans. Despite this, at her funeral, the French courtier and memoirist, the Duke of Saint-Simon, stated that she was the wealthiest single princess of Europe. The Grand Mademoiselle was laid to rest at the Basilica of Saint-Denis outside Paris 2 weeks after she died. A ghastly incident occurred during the ceremony. It was tradition for the entrails of royals to be removed and embalmed separately in early modern France. This was so that the body could lie in state for longer without decomposing as quickly. The entrails were then placed in an urn and buried with the body at the time of the funeral. In the Duchess of Montpensier's case, her entrails began to ferment, and the urn holding them exploded during the funeral service, creating a rotten smell that led many attendees to flee from the church. It was a bad end for a woman born with immense wealth, royal blood, and every advantage imaginable, yet who spent much of her life trapped by the very power and privilege that was supposed to make her untouchable. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Anne Marie Louise d'Orléans, the Grand Mademoiselle. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of life down below in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also let me know down below in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.